The reality is this is, as they say, that this is the most dumbest AI that we are ever going to use. So it's only going to increase from here.
Yeah, from my point of view, the human element will remain, but just be a lot less kind of only operational and sort of that oversight and audits and review.
I think agility is really important as well. Helping people think about their jobs as not just the PD or the job description that they've got, but thinking about, well, what is the job that needs to be done right now? That's where the impact is, that's where the opportunity is.
Finance leadership has clearly evolved. Being a finance leader is now being a strategic leader as well within the organisation.
You know, empower the people to find the 1%, that 1% improvement that could mean $3 million less of stock sitting around in one of their 3PL sites.
Culture is really one of the biggest drivers to bring people on the journey of change.
And welcome to the Common Factor series. I'm here with some fantastic guests talking about technology in finance. Welcome everyone, it's great to have you all here. Really excited to delve into the discussion we have today. Now, I wanted to start with Tariq. Tariq, technology is reshaping finance at an unprecedented rate. From your perspective, what is the most transformative trend that you've been seeing in 2025?
Thanks, Maddie. So we talk about technology and we don't talk about generative AI or agentic AI today, of course. I think that's a bit of a miss. However, sometimes I call it a bit of a traditionalist view when it comes to technology for finance. Yes, generative AI or agentic AI has a lot of potential and there's a lot happening in that space. But practically speaking, a lot of finance applications or the finance processes are still being there for over quite a long period of time and becoming more complex over and over again, and being bombarded with an excess of Excel files and everything. They can get a lot of benefit from the traditional AI, which we call more around the machine learning or the predictive analytics. And that's where I see a lot of organizations now getting more and more mature in that space. So for example, one of the trend that I'm now seeing these days a lot is around using AI or machine learning for process optimization. So for process mining, for example. So for example, I have used it as well to simplify or optimize some of the processes, which is really takes the process optimization exercise to the next level. So building more of a process excellence mindset and a more of a process excellence capabilities within the finance function, which I believe is very important from where finance stands today.
Yes. I think it's a really interesting point around process optimization as well, and I want to delve into that very soon. Now, each of you comes from a very different area of finance as well, so it's great to have a variant of perspectives here at the table. But I wanted to ask, how do technological advancements that we're discussing today manifest differently across different industries and across different sectors as well? I might start with Francine. Francine, how do you think it manifests differently?
I think fundamentally the finance function is inherently the same across different sectors, and then there's the different nuances for your own sector. So if I think about, for me now in the non-bank lending sector, we've got a lot of technological advancements around things like fraud detection and predictive analysis around defaults on loans. So I think fundamentally the function's the same and the impact's the same, and then the nuances depend on what your industry-specific requirements are.
And Max, how about you? How do you think it varies across different sectors?
Yeah, so partly I kind of agree with Francine. I guess kind of the angle I kind of think about is sort of the last, I guess, most of the last 10 years been in technology companies. So finance in technology companies, where technology is really kind of the driver of the business from a product innovation, from marketing innovation. And sort of finance has really been kind of looked at as well, you guys need to catch up, but we're not really investing that much into finance. And so what we've had to try and do, at least kind of from my observations, is maybe underinvest, but try and evolve with the existing stack for a little bit longer in order to make those advancements. Eventually, you do build that business case, and eventually you do kind of get that buy-in, and eventually you do get both the funds and the time to invest into investing into the technology and advancements. But it's taken longer, and it's been kind of harder to sort of be in those environments where you do see a lot of innovation and you can't quite utilize it at all. So that's sort of what I've seen from, as I said, in the technology point of view. But I agree that the nuances are also different in other areas.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Vince, from a technology perspective as well, from a Workday perspective, where do you see the variation, I guess, in appetite as well to take up these emerging technologies from different sectors? Where do you see that variation?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, and I'll come back to the sector point, but if I think about it in terms of, it doesn't matter what the technology is, right? And if you think about it, like from, I guess from a finance lens, it's whether I'm getting data through dashboards or reports, or whether I'm actually bringing to life, conversational AI or generative AI or agentic AI. The fundamental piece in it is the data, right? You've got to trust the data, and as finance folks, I guess that's the bit that we want to make sure that, first and foremost, can I trust the data that I'm seeing? Because that's always the biggest piece that we argue about. So we kind of really emphasise the integrity in the data, right? So we spend a lot of time in making sure that that there's an element of technology that solves for the data piece, and then we bring out all the fun stuff, right, on the top of that. But I think from a sector perspective, and it's interesting, just across all broad sectors, they've all got very different challenges post-pandemic, right? There are folks that have definitely thrived during the pandemic, but have actually now declined post-pandemic, and those that are certainly thriving post. But I do feel like, and your point, Max, highlights that I think there's this element of cost is still king, right? And companies are a lot more careful in terms of spending that, and therefore the technology decisions, because the easy path is, let's just go drive a big transformation and bring to life the tech. And you can do that across driving data centralisation and create a single source of truth across everything. Well, that comes with a lot of risk, but there are some lower risk approaches around, things like your financial applications or a modern planning application, for example, that can give you that trusted pane of glass where you can predict in terms of where the business goes, or you can adjust and accelerate that decision making without really going too far underneath the hood of the organisation. Manage the risk and the expectation that we need to make sure that we, better manage the business in challenging times, but at the same time, enable finance to be that, I guess that strategic business partner, right, in the conversation.
Yeah.
I know we can unpack that a little more, but
and yeah, that's such a valid point, and there is always that balance we need to create between strategic thinking and going for those quick wins, going for those early wins to build a momentum, to gain a bit of an organizational support, bit of an engagement, to then actually use that to solicit support from the executive teams and from all those people who are responsible for, of course, funding and everything, to actually get to that position. So use it as a more of a, what I have found really useful is that use these quick wins or early wins with some good impact, of course. There has to be some business problem that they are solving, of course. And once you do that, you get people behind it. And you can actually use that to finance your transformation journey, so which is a little bit more helpful from that perspective.
Yeah, I think those quick wins build that confidence within your teams, and also the rest of the C-suite as well. I wanted to go to Annette now and just talk around, some organisations are hesitant to adopt emerging technologies. We do know that,
yes.
Often out of fear and often out of just not understanding the potential, and then also often with a lot of legacy systems as well. So what do you find are the biggest barriers from your perspective, and how can finance leaders overcome these?
So when I talk about barriers, I think the three things for me is cultural barriers, leadership barriers and investment barriers. So in the last two organisations that I've worked in, they've both pulled away from big ERP projects. and they've said, well, we've got a number of legacy systems, so over 300 legacy systems. How are we going to, or how can we leverage data integrations, a data lake to be able to piggyback off that data set to create value? So we looked at the P&L and we said, well, what are the 4 key things? One is top line growth, one is cost optimization, one is cash flow as an example. How do we get some big wins in those areas to generate value? So actually leveraging technology and creating that culture of value creation and leadership really backing that as a way of actually driving financial results as well. So you're getting your bang for your buck, because when organisations think about upgrading their ERP, they're thinking, well, what are we actually going to get out of this? And a lot of the times we understand that we are actually quite we're lacking standardisation and understanding of our data to be able to do that really well in a cohesive implementation. And it's also often a reiterative process, because within 2-3 years the business has changed path potentially and you've missed an opportunity. So I think, yeah, having that roadmap of those quick wins, like you said, Tariq, and then thinking about what are the big long-term strategic things that we want to do as an organisation, and are those quick wins sort of getting us in a position that we will be able to jump to those strategic projects and deliver on those.
And Francine, how about you? How do you think you can overcome, I guess, organisations that you do find that the culture is resistant to adopting these emerging technologies?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Annette. I think culture is really one of the biggest drivers to bring people on the journey of change. And I think culture is impacted from 2 main things. One is from the top. It's really important that there's full buy-in across the executive suite and that they're fully on board with what you're trying to do. And the other one is to bring everyone on the journey. So, you know, a really important part of implementation of any big system is making sure that everyone's aligned, even if it doesn't impact their part of the business right now. So you might decide to roll out something across finance first as a little bit of a tester, try and get that quick win. I think it's important to share that with the business and to share the wins and the losses, to share the things you got wrong, to show them that that's okay, and to bring them on the journey with you, so that when it goes to a broader part of the company that you're trying to roll out, they're on board with that and they're comfortable and they've seen it happen already.
Yeah, definitely. And let's talk a little bit around the data piece as well that Vince recommended. And I think we wanted to mention around the automation and the AI-driven decision-making piece, but how that's becoming mainstream in finance. Max, how do you think we should balance human oversight with that AI-driven decision-making as well?
Yeah, so I guess kind of on that evolving kind of landscape of moving more and more to automation, sort of my approach has really been to test and learn, and in the sense that you try and implement kind of the small processes, do things in parallel, make sure you understand what's happening, be comfortable with the results, and then as move away from that parallel process and start kind of more doing the human element is kind of an audit element almost, whereby it's the checking, it's ensuring that the AI is still moving in the right direction of what you intend it to be, that there hasn't been kind of use cases that you didn't quite picture and they're going in a different way. So from my point of view, the human element will remain, but just be a lot less kind of only operational, and sort of that oversight and audits and review and kind of seeing more and more opportunities of other processes that can move that way and can kind of help the business, help the function, help the individual to get all those more and more of those lower level tasks into a world that fewer humans have to do too much touching.
I do need to jump in on that one, Max, because I think you've touched on something that's really key, I think, right? Finance is always, and that's not a disadvantage. I think it's what makes finance the trusted advisor in the business, but we tend to hold back in that moving in fear of, I'll say it, AI is going to replace my job, right? And I know in finance that's probably the biggest question. It's like if I'm in payroll or if I'm in payables, it's like, well, hey, maybe my role is in this, and therefore there's that resistance. But I think it's important to, whether we haven't done a good job of it from a technology perspective, is really talk about the fact that AI technology, when we're thinking about it, is really to augment the roles, right? Like we're very passionate about, exponentially driving, like your ability to drive, to be the superhero, right? To deliver that exponential value in your business. Now that's not to replace the role, it's just to do more with what we have. And coming back to that, the cost pressures and challenges that, that most businesses do feel. So it's a point that's worth underlining is that there is an element of trusted AI as it relates to finance, and in particular in terms of when we think about AI, that's right at the top of our list, is that we need to make sure that that finance can trust the agents that we're putting out, or the generative AI, because there's many elements to it, but it's really ensuring that it is there to augment the roles and not to replace it.
Yeah, definitely. And we were talking about that even before the session as well, is also around the education piece. But that roles will change with the emerging technologies being implemented, but it's understanding how they'll change and how they can benefit our staff. Now, let's look around scenario modelling and dynamic forecasting. We know they can be crucial for future-proofing financial strategies. Annette, talk us through an example you might have seen where this has been really crucial.
Yeah, so we've implemented a cloud-based forecasting system because prior to that, finance had owned the forecast because they were the only ones that were capable of managing the Excel spreadsheets. So it was really, really difficult for the business. Yeah. Finance took ownership of it. When we implemented this cloud-based forecasting tool, it was up to the P&L leaders of the business to define what their forecasts look like. The next iteration on that was, well, how about we bring in statistical forecasting to forecast certain elements? We know based on workdays what volume things will be. But we made it really clear about roles and responsibilities where leaders understood what was happening in their labour structure, their overtime, and their maintenance plans. It would free them up to only have to focus on key lines that would fluctuate based on the intelligence that was held at site. So they actually embraced that because they went from spending an hour doing their forecast every week to 20 minutes. It was more of a light touch. And we found that when the first phase was to test the statistical on the whole level of the forecast, and we found that was actually more accurate than what our people were providing us. So then we left it running in the background as a check. So every month we would say, well, what did the business put forward as their forecast versus what's the scenario modelling telling us? And we would go back and play back to them, and they would actually pick up on, well, actually this is great. And actually the engagement from them of, well, you're freeing me up to do my role, let's leave it to the tool to tell us what we think.
Yeah, I think it sounds like it was well received. I know Vince has got a use case, I'm sure, from a Workday perspective where this has been super successful as well. Yeah,
no, absolutely. And I think it's interesting that you've touched on that point, right? And you'll appreciate that. I think what we saw during the pandemic that's now become the normal is, we saw scenario modelling and reforecasting increase like 30x when the pandemic hit, right? And a lot of organisations who didn't, drive agility within their systems, would have suffered from that. But essentially that's now become the norm, right? In terms of the importance of continuously forecasting, and therefore the need for scenario planning is certainly increased. And and what we've seen in our customer base is on the low end, folks in aged care who were able to keep people in jobs because they could forecast for coming grants and kept people through the pandemic. That's now provided them with better cash flow modelling, in terms of their ability to forecast for what's coming. And on the other extreme, we've got organisations like ExxonMobil, who globally, have gone from running 20 scenario plans a week to thousands as they're testing their 50-year contracts. But coming back to that predictive element, right? Because they're dealing with probably very similar granularity in terms of their sites and their locations, and they've got something like, I think it's 1,200 sites across the globe, including an oil rig on the African coast that has to, every week,
feedback in.
They've got to provide the feedback. Everyone, finance doesn't own the forecast. The site owns the forecast, and then testing that against the machine learning, and the elements that the prediction and the application can provide. And it's just nice seeing that, again, coming back to augmenting and being able to do more, right, with with the current people that we have in finance, it's nice seeing those examples.
And you mentioned agility as well, and I think finance leaders are expected to be more agile than ever. And I would love to know, Annette, again, just going back to you, how organisations can switch from being reactive to proactive when it comes to decision making, especially with real-time data and that predictive planning we were talking about.
So just talking about that scenario planning model, we would often spend 3 months to build up a budget. Our budget was done for us because we could just turn on the long range. We'd open up the periods and it would tell us. So we would overlay, well, what M&A transactions have we got on? What are we assuming about price increase? What's the macro data telling us about the market? And effectively, you've got your first pass of the budget done. It was fantastic in terms of time saving, freeing people up to actually think about, well, what are the other levers now that we're saying that this is the outlook? What do we need to do to change those business drivers to either scale up or think about costs in a different way. So at any point in time, long range where you're going, so you're able to make decisions more in a proactive manner. Whereas historically, we've sort of closed the books. We're looking potentially 1-2 months out in advance at what our outlook is, and there's just that. There's no light. You can't see what's actually coming for you until the train hits.
Yeah. And Max, I mean, real-time data visualisation has always been a game changer, I think, for financial planning as well. So how can finance teams leverage these analytics to really improve that forecasting accuracy?
Yeah, I mean, with real time, I guess kind of my approach has really been real time is very tactical, and you use that from a day-to-day, week-to-week basis, and you kind of try and make those tweaks to from a tactical point of view, headcount, investing, moving people around, and from a workforce planning point of view. But it's the balance for me then is how do you use that to augment exactly kind of what Annette's talking about, the long-term planning, and that's where if you're now saving all your time from creating another sheet in a tab and adding rows and adding another scenario in Excel, and you don't have to do that, and you can now focus on all those strategic things that Annette talks about. That's where kind of you get those wins, you get that value add, and to me that is, again, that's the augmentation it's not a reducing a headcount, it's not necessarily like that, but it is we've got these tools, they're helping us to both short-term, tactical, and really be tactical and really be on the pulse, as well as long-term, strategic. I can now spend that time to figure out where I'm going, what makes sense, when is that M&A transaction really going to take place, and what are the angles that I need to think about that? Is it just top line? What's the additional investment we'll have to do, and things like that. So that's probably kind of the ways I kind of think about it, both short term and long term.
And maybe I could just add to that, something else that I'm finding we're more able to access is market data. So it's one thing to be able to do our own predictive analysis for our business, but what does that mean in market? And technology is just allowing us to digest that data so much more and make that a part of our planning process. So we might have a predictive indicator about something changing in market that might lead to a preemptive price change. And that pricing strategy might mean if we're a business with stock, that we can move stock that we might not be able to if we wait too long. Or for us in the lending sector, it's about pricing our loans the right way to get ahead of the market. So we can use a lot more data because we're able to analyse it more quickly in real time and be able to see the impact of our own decisions on our business, but also as part of a bigger market decision.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point as well. And I want to go to an issue or a barrier that often organisations deal with, and it's going back to the data piece. And I know many organisations struggle with data silos, and that can be a huge barrier and pain point. Look, I'll go to you first, Francine, as how you think executive leaders can facilitate that seamless data integration across the finance, the HR, the operations teams. What do you think?
Yeah, disparate systems are the biggest creator of data silos, and I think historically that's how organisations set up their data. Each different part of the business had their own system. Annette's example is a great one, creating cloud-based forecasting. That means everyone is tapping into the same system, regardless of where in the business they sit. And so I think those cloud-based platforms and APIs are really a step in the right direction. So we really need to embrace those. The cloud-based systems allow anyone, regardless of which sector of the business they're in, which geographic location they're in, which post-COVID we're seeing, organisations that are quite global now. And the APIs mean that the data we're looking at is real-time data, and we don't have that human step in the middle, so reduction of the chance of errors in that data moving from one system to the other. So we can have modular systems, we can pull them together with the APIs, access them through the cloud. I think that's really a big step towards breaking down the silos.
Yeah, definitely. I know, Tariq, I'll go to you first, actually. It looks like you were nodding away there.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on data, the pain point when it comes to data silos and that integration piece?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess there is a mindset change which is needed to treat data as a strategic asset or data as a product. And then from a technology point of view, if we talk about, we need to move towards data productization, right? Where we are actually creating reusable sets of data which can be wired across the entire organization, depending upon, of course, the access and everything. The problem with the current, of course, so there are two kind of problems, right? One is, of course, having all these different data silos which are based out of legacy systems and everything. The second is the evolution into having a data foundations, things like data lake, etc. However, that also still creates a layer of extra usage from financial analysts or from supply chain analysts, for example, to bring those data out, transform it, and then create their own version of truth. It's very important to build that wiring within the organization to create reusable data products and then consume those across the organization. I think that's one of the ways to really what I have found, where some of the mature organizations who have actually worked towards breaking those data silos is working.
Fantastic. And look, I wanted to turn to Vince on this as well. I know this is Workday's bread and butter. So what have you seen successful when it comes to data integration, and where do you think organisations are going wrong when you've spoken to them?
Yeah, no, I want to build on where we just were, and I like the use of data as a product, because I think there's something in that, because you're right. I think the recognition, I think we all know that data is the most important, asset other than people. It's very quickly the two of them are competing, and if I kind of look at it, and it's good that you touched on cloud-based applications, because I think when we, as a technology business, we always think about, we've got to modernise your experience, right? So I always think about, from a planning application and perspective, is to always make sure that we simplify the engagement. Like it's got to be self-service, it's got to be no coding, no scripting. Like it's got to be, you can go in there and make your changes, at pace. It's, analysis is the biggest part, right? If you get your data right, then your ability to ingest that data into an application becomes super important. So therefore, the technology needs to be able to not offer up any objections. And I won't get into what some organisations in a legacy setup can find themselves even just trying to import, I don't know, like a gig of data, let alone a terabyte of data. And that's what's probably led a lot of businesses to find themselves in the data warehouses and building these data, productizing data within the business. But I think where I tend to kind of think about it always in two parts, and this is what businesses will always say. It's like, yeah, the easy path is I can just go and do a big ERP transformation, and we can do that, and you get lots of benefits. But I think you've touched on that. Not all organisations, but then we need to meet businesses in terms of where they are. And therefore, it's more of coming back to there are applications that can really, you probably don't need all the detail in the data. You probably need to be able to get a trend by simply just looking at summary. The summary triggers a need to go and double click into the information. So, feed the machine learning with enough at the summary level. Therefore, that simplifies, the data integration challenge, which all projects will. That could be the failure. In fact, most projects will fail because they didn't get the data integration right, especially if you're looking for real-time data. You've got so much to bring into it. So it's really, I tend to think about things like a planning application in particular will make that very easy. Like you can simplify importing your data. You can get to, utilising the machine learning, that's embedded within these applications to get the value out of, and deliver back to the business, and have finance really lead that transformation in terms of acceleration of that decision making by, without you having to pour lots of risk and money into a big integration project, and then that starts you on a journey of change in the business.
Yeah,
right?
You have to build that credibility first. I think any technology strategy has to have a data strategy at its core. Where I've been, we brought all the analysts together because we thought that group together could make the biggest difference. Developing data dictionaries, understanding data lineage, understanding key data points that we had across multiple systems that multiple people were touching on, to get the biggest bang for our buck first, and defining those, making sure that reporting has the objective, the audience and the action, because how many times do you look at report and you don't know what's the scope, what data points are you looking at, what are the calculations that are going on in the background. So getting really clear on defining what people are looking at helps people come in. We sort of went with the thinking of, well, you don't need training, because we would constantly be asked, well, I haven't been trained in this yet. It's like, well, did anyone train you on how to use your banking app? Probably not. So that triggered something in us that says, well, we need to make it so simple and intuitive that we don't need an instruction manual to run this stuff. And get in that collaboration, because I think collaboration and communication is the two things that technology is so fabulous at doing. In the scenario planning model, as the forecast is a communication tool, so all that intel, insight across the business can come into one place to actually give us a true reflection of what the reality and the future might hold. And then the collaboration. So we had multiple people we created this demand for change, which was actually more exciting than trying to tug people along. People wanted to be involved because they could see the value in it. And then we created this wave of people that would just come and say, oh, this is really interesting. How do I bring this to our department? How do I do this in our team?
Yeah. If I could sorry, this is an old FP&A planner jumping in, because you said something that totally triggered another point too, right? And because again, it always gets missed, and that's that we're always driving the collaboration. Like when we think about planning, yes, we're solving it for finance, but we are actually what the most important part that we're trying to solve here is we're actually trying to meet each department in terms of, and each user in terms of where they're at, and then drive those connection points. You'll love this one. Headcount reconciliation. The most talked about topic, right? But it's like the biggest impact, right, to bottom line, and it's amazing the amount of cycle time that goes into data that you can't even trust, right? Like, and therefore it's like, but how do you facilitate that connect, drive more interlock across the organisation that has a when it's all connected and integrated, that it drives that direct impact in near real time, and then you're able to make decisions. Goodness, in terms of deferring your hiring, you free up millions of dollars in costs that can go towards, investing in a revenue generating activity in an offshore market. You're able to do that in a board meeting versus multiple board meetings, right? And therefore you activate that agility at speed.
And how do you work together to help each other? So we had an overtime issue. Once we overlaid, because the HR systems don't have any reference point to activity or business activity, once we overlaid overtime in relation to business volume, you sort of seen there was this huge element of structural overtime. How do you work with people and culture to sort of drive towards outcomes there? It helps people and culture, helps the bottom line. It's that mutual partnership.
It improves that collaboration between all the departments. It's really helping that cross-functional piece as well. And I can see it's evident to me that finance leadership has clearly evolved. It's really, being a finance leader is now being a strategic leader as well within the organisation. I wanted to talk about maybe what new skills are required for finance leaders to thrive in this tech-driven world. I might start with you, Francine. Where do you think we need to be focusing on?
We've talked a lot today about AI and the impact of AI. We have to be the leaders in understanding AI and interpreting the outputs. It's, something Vince touched on earlier was, the fact that AI is augmenting, not replacing, and I think that's really true, but we have to be the leaders in how we utilise that data. So getting outputs, AI will be great. It will, identify the patterns. It will give you some predictive analysis, but so what? Like, we have to create the skill set around that overlays the context, that brings it in line with our strategic goals, and actually works out what the actions are that come out of that. So that's a really important skill set for us.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Tariq, where do you think the new skills for a finance leader are at this stage?
No, absolutely, and I would build on to what Francesca just mentioned around having that ability to critically evaluate and analyze the numbers, the output, that is coming out of AI. Because again, the reality is, this is, as they say, that this is the most dumbest AI that we are ever going to use. So it's only going to increase from here, right? So, but it's very important to make sure that we are also not falling victim of the automation bias. That yes, if it is coming out of machine, it's coming out of algorithm, it must be right. We need to build a critical mindset, and who else than a CFO or a finance leader who needs to have a critical mindset to do that? Secondly, I guess the very important piece we need to all build around is that AI is reshaping everything. We talked about technology is challenging our current ways of working. What it means change. So finance leaders need to become change management, change leaders. They should be able to lead people, lead organizations into change. We are fortunate to be in that position, having a vantage point to the entire organization. There is no other function who has that level of visibility into the entire organization. So we are rightly placed. We start with a position of advantage. Now it's up to us how we capture that advantage and move on. And sorry, just last piece that I would say is around that's building a digital mindset. And what that is, very simply, it's not about knowing how to code or knowing the inner workings of statistics and everything or machine learning. It is simply it is the ability to connect the output of machine and algorithm to solve a business problem. That's it. This is the ability we need to develop over next few years or as the technology evolves.
Yeah, definitely. And look, as leaders, you need to foster a culture of innovation as well, and digital adoption, as you mentioned, Tariq, within your teams. Annette, how do you foster that innovative mindset as well among your teams? You said that you found that often people coming to you and going, I want to be a part of this project.
It's empowerment, because your desk gets so full. It's about how do you empower and multiply out that leadership across your teams, across the organisation. How do you make people feel that they have the freedom to trial, error, learn, and feed that through the life cycle of the organisation. I think agility is really important as well. Helping people think about their jobs as not just the PD or the job description that they've got, but thinking about, well, what is the job that needs to be done right now, and fill in the gaps, because that's where the impact is, that's where the opportunity is for people to build leadership and build a career. You don't often get promoted because you do your job really well. The people that get promoted and build their careers are those that step into the spaces that no one is game enough to go. So for me, it's all about building that bravery and courage, and giving people and rewarding them for actually falling over, getting back up again, and keep pushing forward.
Yeah, I think the allowing for a bit of failure is actually super important, because often staff, I found just talking to our community of finance leaders, often if their staff are afraid to fail, they won't try at all. So I think that's a really good point. But I want to just throw to Vince around innovation, and where you found that has been the key for organisations you've worked with to innovate really, and innovate their finance functions.
Yeah, if I could just add one bit, because I really like what Annette just said. I think the freeing up of finance to actually, and I agree, Tariq, finance actually is probably the only function in the business that knows exactly what's going on. So you've got that advantage, and I think empowering the staff to actually just get out and go. And maybe it's probably, we need to be more proactive in terms of, as part of that digital mindset, bringing the AI, is actually maybe start thinking about what are the skills that they need to be that strategic business advisor, and maybe start calling that out in their development, because I think that's what will get activated, right? The innovation and the tech will actually free up the time for these roles to be strategic. Yeah. And most finance, I remember sitting in an office many years ago going, how do you just even have a business partner conversation with my client, right? And I think if we can bridge that for them, knowing that the technology is going to open that up, and it sounds like you've done some awesome bridging, already, and I think just defining that will help drive the innovation. Because I think coming back to your question, Maddie, the technology will only accelerate, and that's not that's a good thing, right? And I think the technology will continue to bring all sorts of innovation. And we've had organisations that are now using generative AI to actually, I don't want to see the report. I want to ask the technology for the report. I want it to also, in that Google matching or recommendation style, tell me also, if I'm looking at my product lines by site that are most profitable and non-profitable, I want it to also make recommendations of data trends that are linked, right? So that's that power of the machine as it continues to learn, the longer it stays in place. I think the other part that we've also seen is, and Francine, you touched on it earlier, is now the trust in I can bring external proxies into my analysis. How am I tracking against without breaching privacy or any of those things? There's enough government sources that are out there that are approved for example, we've got a customer in the pharmaceutical space, and they're using predictive machine learning as a way to, as they forecast for product on shelf, they'll go to the Singapore government site around that publishes expected flu rates and all those things, and then they use that to proxy their demand forecast against what the team are telling them, just to again improve that that 1% improvement that could mean $3 million less of stock sitting around in one of their 3PL sites. So it's really looking for that, where do we make that empower the people to find the 1% difference in the operation.
Yeah, those 1% changes, I think, are more powerful than we often give them credit for as well. And you mentioned, Vince, that technology is evolving so rapidly, it's going to continue to evolve. If we put out our crystal balls, Max, where do you think the finance function and what will it look like in 2030? It's really hard to predict, but tough question, but I'd love to see what you're thinking for the next couple of years.
So yes, I agree, tough, but at the same time, 5 years is a long time, 5 years is a short time as well. So some things will absolutely stay the same, and some things we have got no idea what they're going to look like. I feel like today we've kind of covered quite a few things that pretty confident that they are going to contribute to what things are going to look like in 2030. I sort of probably want to touch on 4 points and really from today's conversation. One, agility and the importance of agility for finance and for finance to be able to work with the rest of the business and to drive the rest of the business, similarly to kind of what Tariq was saying. Two, data. So if it's not critical already, it's just going to become even more critical. And in the world of more automation, of more AI, and kind of keeping track of that data, understanding it, and being on that pulse. Three, I think we touched a bit earlier on, is culture, and again from a finance point of view, really being in tune with what's happening in the finance function culture, but then how does that finance function sit with the rest of the business, and like Francine also talked about, outside of the business, and so for finance sometimes historically silo. That doesn't work, and that will need to kind of work a little bit better from that cultural element. And the last one I think we've talked a lot about is the strategic element to finance. So that's as the operational bits take less and less, hopefully, of day-to-day time. That those strategic elements from CFO down to analysts and the like those are things that are going to have to become a lot more part of the day-to-day and part of the job description and of everyone.
Definitely. Now, we've got a little bit of time for final thoughts around, I guess, our key takeaway from the discussion. It's really, as Max has mentioned, we've covered quite a few different areas that we should, or trends that we should be keeping our eye on. But Francine, I might start with you. What's your key takeaway from today's discussion, and what would you like to bring back to your organisation?
I think ultimately the overriding message for me that I'm taking away and that I try and take every day into my organisation is to be the leader of that change and transformation. And nothing can happen if we stand still. So the technology is here, it's not going to go anywhere. We have to embrace it. It's absolutely critical to stay aligned and in front of our competitors and to keep the business where it needs to be. So we need to be the champions of that change, but we also need to be the people with the skills to roll out that change and transformation across the organisation, far beyond finance. You know, as Tariq mentioned, we see everything. Finance is a great place to start, I think, to prove it out, get your quick win, but we have to be able to really bring the whole organisation on that strategic journey and be the enabler.
How about you, Tariq?
I believe, and the biggest takeaway for me as well, is that how do we actually coexist with technology and co-create with it, as opposed to seeing it as something, as an entity which we need to compete with. So it is going to be an augmentation, but then as a leader, how do we do that? How do we bring that augmentation within our organizations? How do we build those cultures? How do we build our digital mindset? How are we championing the change? So I guess these are some of the key takeaways I would definitely be taking away with me.
Yeah, definitely. Max?
I was thinking something kind of similar to what I guess Tariq is saying. For me, it's kind of that balance of augmentation and how do you ensure that you're getting the balance right and you're continuously basically reviewing that and kind of assigning time in your week, in your day to just pause and think about that. So for me, balance, that's the takeaway.
100%. Vince, key takeaway?
Yeah, I think key takeaway is I'm true believer that I think finance has, it's almost like a once in a career opportunity now to really evolve the careers, right? Become quite a strategic function in the business, and I think we tend to focus it too much on the technology sometimes. But my big takeaway here is I think we've got to do a better job at the skills, calling out the skills that I think we need to. Like we know finance needs to go on the journey. We know that people need to go on the journey. We know that there are barriers in terms of that journey, and I think we just need to focus on calling out exactly what are those skills and help activate and enable that more.
For sure. Annette, you're lucky last.
For me, it's still creating that compelling vision of why, painting that picture for people and as a way to bring them on board, create that demand for change rather than trying to fight with the barriers to change. It's always more exciting, right, when people want to come along. So continually to reinforce, show what good could look like, role model that leadership behaviour, celebrate the wins across the organisation, create a bit of hype around things like that can go a long way in sort of getting underneath some of that reluctance.
100%.
Yeah, that's probably the most important.
100%. And as Tariq said, being change managers as well in the organisation. Now, we're at the end of the session, but I want to say a big thank you to all of you for joining us today. It's been a fantastic conversation and we've really delved into, I guess, the potential of technology in the finance function. So thank you so much for coming today, and I look forward to seeing you at our next talk show.